Medical examiners are not first responders, but that day, Mark Desire went straight to ground zero.
When the South Tower cracked and I looked up, you were just under. It was a stone's throw from the building. You were just under that, that initial debris. You could see the steel and the concrete and the fire, and it was like, I'm dead. That's it. This is how I'm going to die.
His team barely survived. It was the start of one of the most complex forensic challenges in human history. 20 years later, 40% of the victims are still unaccounted for.
I think for a lot of people, it's going to be surprising to hear that there are so many people who aren't identified.
Everything that destroys DNA was present at ground zero. So fire, water, sunlight, jet fuel, diesel.
Nearly 22,000 remains were collected in the years that followed. And while some families got the call, others, like the Stacks, did not.
I'm waiting for that phone call. Waiting. Hey, we identified a piece. But it never happens.
Larry Stack was a firefighter, 32 years on the job.
He rose up to the rank of battalion chief. He started out as a fireman and rose up and loved every part of his job.
That love transferred to his sons, who are firefighters themselves. In 2001, Larry Stack was considering retirement.
While they were looking at the first tower burning, the plane hit the second one. He put the binoculars down, he looked at his guys and said, I think they're going to need us now.
Stack was helping an injured man when the buildings came down.
It was just typical of the kind of man he was. He was just a big, beautiful, handsome Irishman with great blue eyes and very dedicated to his job. He would have never left.
They held a funeral in 2016, burying a blood donation Larry made before his death.
When you had your service for him, and it was years and years later, and it's quite a scene. And how important was that day for you as a family?
That was an amazing day. I was completely overwhelmed by the amount of firemen and volunteer firemen and New York City firemen and the mayor of the city of New York and the commissioner and friends and family. There were thousands of people.
They say never forget, and the guys showing up for the funeral that day, they never forgot, and it was a sight to see. It was tremendous.
Families like the Stacks are at the heart of the medical examiner's work.
We had to evolve. We had to push the science out of that necessity to make more IDs.
Just this month, they made two: Dorothy Morgan, an insurance broker, and another unidentified victim. The technology has come a long way, especially with extracting DNA from bone.
So this looks very different than it did in 2001.
Yes. Yeah, there's no mortar and pestle here.
Using fake samples, the lab showed us the process.
Being able to grind into that fine powder allows the chemicals to better act onto those cells to extract the DNA.
And that effectively, at some point in the last 20 years, allowed you to go back to bone pieces that you couldn't identify then, that you now can identify because of this process?
Yes, when this process came, now this process has been for over a decade, but yes, it did allow us to go back, and it was definitely an advancement.
And now, Desire says, new, more sensitive technology will give them an even better chance of making an ID.
I'm very appreciative of the work that they're doing, and I hope they can continue and help. If they don't help us, then perhaps they'll help someone else.
These people trying to identify everybody, I think no one's ever going to forget.
Your office has described it as a sacred obligation.
We made a commitment 20 years ago to identify everyone, and that commitment is as strong today as it was 20 years ago.
His ripped jacket from 9/11 hangs in the lab. A reminder, there's still work to be done. Stephanie Gosk, NBC News, New York.